Hi, I'm Vic. I'm grateful to be here tonight.
Welcome. My name is Nick Michael, and this is the Pivot Point Podcast. And let's just get right into it. Tell us about a pivot point in your life. I'm sure, given what I've heard about it, there were numerous moments. But let's start off. We'll go through what stood out for you most that you'd like to share with the listeners.
Well, leading up to a pivot point is a broad spectrum. I'm in recovery from alcoholism, and I did use dry goods. And when I refer to dry goods, it's other substances other than alcohol. We'll keep it on a very plain playing field, not to get too much into what they call a drug-a-log in the rooms. I do have 35 years plus in a program.
Congratulations to that.
Thank you very much. And basically, I'm a newcomer every day, and pivot points in recovery come at you in different directions and at different times of your life in recovery itself. What would you like to know?
Well, you know what I found is listeners that are not very familiar with what it's like to be in recovery have a really different idea about what it's all about. And they have no idea of, most often, those who have no idea of what it's like to have been addicted and to have been experiencing struggles both in their various stages of their lives. So if you want to share what some of these struggles people have with accepting their addiction, and then what methods are most effective to addressing it, that might be one place to start.
It's very good, Nick. Yeah. You have to, when you're in the throes of addiction, in the beginning, it's fun. You're going to parties, you're trying different things out, and you could probably say I drank all along for over 20 some odd years, and use dry goods in between with that. And pivot points, there are several pivot points in a person that is going into recovery. And we'll talk a little bit about hitting a bottom and giving up, or you don't even know you're giving it up. It's in desperation by having the substance not working anymore the way it did when you first started out and got into it all. So I was a functioning alcoholic. I always worked in the field, and that's an important part because you have alcoholics who are not functioning because they do is find a way and means to get and use more. That's, a lot of the slogans, a lot of things I'm going to be saying, catchphrases, it comes from the 12-step programs and by attending a meeting.
So give me a sense then, if you can tell us a little bit about what finally motivated you to seek or begin your recovery. If you want to, I know it must be it must have been emotionally charging for you, but what emotion was really associated to that? What I'm looking for is to try to illustrate to listeners that there's an emotion that impacts them, then there's a thought that overtakes them, and then there's a behavior. So if you take a look at the breakdown, there's something that emotionally charged you and fueled you and motivated you to do something. And that's the thought kicked in, and then the behavior.
Okay. Well, the behavior is going to come in two parts. The behavior is going to come in the beginning using dry goods and alcohol for over 22 years, I should say. Started very young. I was very productive in the field of carpentry and construction management. Therefore, in that field, the substance was always around. I worked for an Irish carpenters union in Manhattan, and sometimes before the toolbox came on the job, we bought the big refrigerator on the job. So eventually the fun was over. It wasn't fun anymore because you were always on a mission to chase the high. You're on a mission to chase the high. And eventually what was happening was I was toxifying myself with so much chemical over a large amount of time, they just stopped working.
So explain that so everyone can understand when you say it toxifying and how did it stop? Like what was happening?
Well, what was going on was involved in dry goods, which is drugs, and alcohol was a constant.
Mm,
Now, it's a juggling act because you're in the throes of addiction, you don't even know it. And now hitting a bottom is a part where I felt, right? I was spiritually broke. I was physically burning out. I wasn't economically broke, but by Monday, my pay was gone. And there's a constant manipulation of your paycheck, or if you got overtime, you would finagle the bookkeeper to give you an overtime check on the side. And this way, because you're trying to hide your cash to allow you to continue using.
yeah, I've heard often that one of the tell us because you were working and you weren't strained, let's say financially to the point where you couldn't buy, that almost perpetuated your addiction, it seems.
Yes, it definitely did because you're constantly making up stories. You're chasing the drugs and alcohol all the time. You're lying to people, and eventually what happens is, like, there's a James Gang song, "I know what you're doing.
Mhm,
You don't
mhm,
think it's showing." And,
and
you
it
know,
shows.
and it
Yeah.
shows, and it shows, and for one instance, I was on a job. I got up to the point where I was a construction manager, supervisor, and they would send me on jobs and I would complete the jobs. I love to work and I love to get overtime because every time I got overtime, I was able to go and drink and send the labor
Mhm.
out for a bottle or go to the bar in the city. And that was like, you know, I was there, I was in it. The problem was I wasn't doing my paperwork, and
Caught up to
slowly
you.
caught up to me, slowly but surely, my general supervisors would send me on a job where there was nobody there.
Mm,
And I go on the job and I'm looking around, there's nobody there. So I continue on with my shenanigans, and I go back to the office at the end of the day and I say to Vinny, "Hey, Vinny, what's going on there? There's nobody there." And they said, "Well, we've been watching you, and apparently it seems like there's nobody there."
that's a profound statement to be hearing, I'm imagining. Wow.
And that was the part where they let me go of that job, and I wound up going back to the carpenters union as a carpenter, put the tools back on, but the using never stopped. It just continued on. And at one point I hit a wall, I hit a bottom to where no matter how much I put into my system,
Mhm.
I wasn't changing how I felt, I was feeling worse.
Right. So that's
That's the
the yeah, that's the
toxification of the pattern, right?
toxification, right. That's very common and many, uh, who've gone through that. I'm curious for you to share what emotion sparked your level of motivation? Because people can be interested in something, but not motivated. I've always been interested in learning Spanish, and I tried many years ago. I was more motivated many, many years ago because I thought that, would help me get a job and positions to be more valuable in the workforce. Yet my motivation eventually ended up stopping. So what cold-hearted emotion kind of took over you and sparked that motivation?
Sheer paranoia,
That's it. Okay.
sheer
So tell us about
paranoia.
that because I'm sure what other feelings were accompanying that?
Okay, paranoia,
Okay.
guilt, and just the main thing was, no matter how much I put into my system,
Right.
it didn't change the way I felt in the
So
beginning.
it worked counter to what you were expecting previously, right? So
Correct.
that's what everyone talks about. That you need more to have that emotion, that high is
Right.
essentially what you're
It's
referring to. Good.
brain
Okay.
it's your
Right.
brain chemistry, your aging process. When I started out young, I was, in my teens, and then I was about 30 when I stopped.
Mm, mm.
But what happened was I got another good job as a shop steward for a construction company, and I decided to stay home and lock myself up in my kitchen and use all day. Now, I was married at the time, still am, thank God. There's something called carpet patrol. People who have used dry goods will know that saying, and it's kind of funny because you could have a pile of drugs on the kitchen table, and if you spill some on the floor, you'd spend an hour crawling around on the floor looking for crumbs. Meanwhile, maybe you didn't spill any, but you had a whole pile on the table. That's you're on carpet patrol. You think people are coming up the side of the building on a ladder. The phone man's
That's the
coming in the
paranoia
house.
you were feeling
That's
too.
sheer paranoia. Sheer paranoia. Close the curtains. You hear sirens, bells, whistles. You're not sleeping. You're not eating properly. And at that point, my wife came home from work and saw me like in a complete catatonic state. Now, I had to really have hit that bottom. I've hit that bottom before. I've relapsed a lot. Every day, every time you use, you relapse.
Mhm.
But at that moment, when she came home, she took one look at me and she says, I don't know what you're doing, but you got to change or you got to get out. And, there was some threats before, but,
Made this different? Because it sounds
oh,
like it was
it
different,
was it was
if you can figure that out.
was the sheer paranoia and the chemicals working in reverse. Massive quantity of chemicals.
It Yeah, because what many refer to as that awakening, that realization, sounds like it hit you all at once at that moment, because that's that moment of change, it seems. And it sounds like that moment of change came cognitively, right? In your head, really.
You know what?
Or was it
That
emotional?
that state, it was emotional.
It was emotional.
It was not strictly, it was emotional, it was physical.
Mm. In what way physical? So if you break it down, the cognitions, the
You know, you
emotions, and the physical.
You don't sleep for days. You don't sleep for days. You lose weight. You're sweating. I would go to meetings in the construction company in the middle of winter, and I'm like sweating up a storm, and the guys are looking at me like, "What the heck are you sweating about?" "Oh, I got the flu." "Yeah, you had the flu 3 times this month." It's always remembered what you said to
Yeah,
who and at what
yeah.
time. So the I hit the wall. My wife took one look at me and she said, "Look, you can't do this anymore." And I was lucky enough to have a close friend who was in the program of AA. She came by, took me to a meeting, and then the next day I signed up with the EAP program with the
Okay.
union. I was lucky
See,
enough to have that.
that's inspirational to hear from many that are at that point, and that's a tough one for many to over the years that I've been working and in the work that I've been doing. It's tough for some people to embrace AA and then even consider going to rehab, or consider coming forward and admitting and accepting that they have an addiction and then doing something about it. That's the hard part that I find for many to try to accept that moment where they can believe in the unknown and give it a good, honest attempt, right? A good try. See, that's a telling moment for you, it seems.
Yes, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen right
Overnight,
away.
right? Yeah,
Didn't
I
happen right
figured.
away.
Yeah.
Didn't. They tell you they have sort of candy coated the meetings
Do
now,
they? Yeah.
and in these days they sort of candy coated it. In the old days, they told sit the f down. Right, take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth. Hold on to your seat because you're going to be in for a ride. And first thing I'd say, big tough construction worker, well, F these people. They don't know what they're talking about. Why is that word think, the slogan think, it was upside down? Every time you walk in a room with the posters, the think one was upside down. So
Hmm.
me with my ADHDness, I'd go over in the meeting and I'm turning the side around. I had some guy practically smack me in the head and say, sit back down. Your thinking's upside down. That's why the sign is like that. And eventually
It sunk in.
it
Yeah.
sunk in. It sunk
Yeah.
in.
The whole. So I know the whole 90 meetings in 90 days. Did that happen the first time you went to the
Pretty much so,
to
yeah.
the uh to a
Yeah,
meeting?
pretty much
So
so.
You were fortunate that you had someone that you trusted and knew, and it sounds like you had a purpose with keeping your relationship, your wife, and keeping perhaps your position that you had lost one and found another, and brought this all together at the same time, as compared to someone else who many are very fearful of just going away for the more even 30 or more days, right, into a rehab. So how was that? How did that work out for you to be able to attend meetings, and were you still working?
Yes, I
Okay,
was
because
lucky
that
enough.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
very good question.
because you know
I was lucky enough to have an aftercare program, and for a year and a half after work, I had to go there for probably about 3 hours. You were assigned a counselor, and you went into group meetings, and the director of the program would make sure you were fitting into the mix.
mm,
Because, like, for instance, one day it was snowing out, and I had worked all day unloading sheetrock or something, some really manual labor I wasn't using. It was snowing out, and I called him up and I said, "I'm not coming in today, it's snowing."
mm,
And he said something to me that was really ironic.
okay, it had an impact on you, huh?
Yeah, it had impact. He said, "You get your ass here into this meeting." He said, "If you had to go out and cop your drugs, or if you had to go to the bar," he said, "you knock the blind guy out in the subway and take his guitar and use it for snowshoes." Something to that effect, you know? He said, "You
Picture that.
knock the guy out on the subway playing the guitar and use it for snowshoes to get to where you had to go." And you know what? He was exactly right.
But he understood you and understood what was happening, it seems, because
He
that
un
seems very insightful to be able to say.
Yeah, well, I have to say he was the director of the program, and he was good at what he did because he's seen all types, heard all the stories, all the excuses, and basically, I pretty much went there on a regular basis. I don't think I ever missed a day. The first day, he didn't cut me any slack. He said, "You get your ass on the train and get here to the city. If I have to wait for you, I'll keep the place open and because I wanna see you in here." And
So that worked for you.
that worked.
Yeah,
That
that
worked
worked.
because usually when you use it and in the program, this is big thing with the program, people have their hands out to embrace you, to help you to love yourself before you can love somebody else. People that when you had drugs and alcohol, the hands were out like this, and when the money and drugs or the alcohol were gone, so were they. So they would disappear when you had nothing to offer to partake.
And that how did that turn out where you recognized that eventually? Because 'Cause I'm sure people don't recognize that right away.
It took a long time.
I'm imagining so.
It took a long time. It took a long time. It took work. Gaining trust back. Gaining trust back was a very big factor because when you use everything's a story or a lie, fabrication, and it's all about the chase. And that's another thing I want to say. In
Yeah,
the
tell us
end,
about that, yeah.
the chase was so much to go cop or go get the bottle of booze or whatever. The chase was almost the high. When you got the stuff and you used it, you feel worse going into it.
For someone not familiar with that, that is not very others that are not familiar with recovery and addiction very much are not aware of that. If you can tell a little bit more about that, about the chase.
Hmm.
Because it reminds me of the other song, The Thrill of the Chase, right? There's a line in the song, but tell us about that. Because
It's
the thrill of the chase was for oftentimes for most is more emotionally satisfying. And then after it's anticlimactic, right? It becomes
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, anticlimactic. In the beginning, you go into parties, you use it, you're getting
right.
drunk, you're throwing up on your shoes, everybody's laughing. And then as through studies and workshops, and later on in years, I moved into the teaching profession and listening to, going to conferences and stuff, they would show you how your brain changes as you
Mhm.
age and as you use. So you don't really realize it because you're in the thick of it, but your whole body chemistry changes. So you still feel the need to go
The
because
urge
that's your that's your
and the
routine.
impulse. Yeah. The habit. Yes.
Right,
Yeah.
that's your, habit, that's your habit, no matter what it was, dry goods or alcohol. That's what you constantly think of doing. So now you're off to the chase, you go into locations, if some one location dries up, you gotta find another location.
So what's
Crazy.
the emotion? What's attachment? What was going on emotionally? What feeling was overriding all that? That was driving all that? Just so we can bring it back to, because I imagine is
It's you know what, I really could never quite
in the moment
pinpoint.
you couldn't figure it out, right?
Yeah,
It sounds like there was a level of excitement.
there's a
There
level
was
of
a there was
yes,
a level of thrill,
right.
seeking out a feeling of ecstasy.
And then there's also a level of there's a level of difficulty and problems because a couple times what they call getting beat. You go to a place and you're giving a stranger money and they're giving you a substance.
Mhm.
And it could be rat poison for all you
Right.
know.
Right.
Or they say, wait here. The old one is wait here. I'll be right down. Or putting your
Right.
money in a hole in the wall and expecting something. And then you totally get beat. So now you're out for the chase. You get beat, and then you can't satiate that feeling about using.
And an increased level of frustration and anger
And you lost your
yes,
money.
yes,
And so it's a vicious cycle.
it is,
It's
it
a
turns out,
vicious
yeah.
cycle.
What would you say to the individual who has a job, who has a family, has kids, right? Has a wife, kids, has extended family around, that is the casual user or to the point where it becomes more daily and more often, and to the point where it becomes more addictive throughout the day, and is faced with going to rehab or going to meetings and is really opposed to both and comes up with a rationale that those meetings are not for me, too spiritual, too whatever, it's too quirky. What do you tell someone who's throwing out all these um, reasons and remaining in denial? And what can you suggest to someone like that? That's the point there where it becomes difficult for a functioning person who's working, has a family, to want to stop that, to go away, or to incorporate additional kind of support in the form of meetings or even outpatient kind of a program. How do you address that? That's a frustrating piece.
That's the magic bullet right
That
there.
is that is. I have to go right to it because that's the most frustrating piece
Yeah. That's the
in the
magic.
work, because I get people in the early stages of when they come in for treatment, and they're coming in for individual or they're coming in for family couple treatment, or sometimes it's the kids that are coming, they're bringing their kids in, and then it's found out that, wow, dad or mom have more of an addictive personality. They're using it extensively. You'd never know it. And they're functioning to the point where it's really easy to hide. But the other partner's worried and scared about that. And their effort was to really get them seen by a clinician to be able to see what kind of intervention can be made by bringing the presenting problem ends up being the kids acting out. So here we have the whole family unit here, and I find myself when I'm working with one, I'm working with the family, and then the stress and the need of one of the parents becomes greater. But then they're in such denial and refusal. And they're at the point oftentimes of losing their job, and they're willing to risk that because it sounds like you were going through the same thing, and that's the tough part. And maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm just trying to imagine, where does one go? What can you tell someone
Well,
where they're going to either rehab or going to meetings?
yeah, well, you're not putting me on the spot because there like again several facets.
Hmm. Hmm.
What was your upbringing like?
Mm.
What's your culture like? I mean, my father, my grandfather, I'm sure their fathers and grandfathers were all from European countries. They were alcoholics, functioning or sometimes non-functioning. My father was a crude person, and you didn't let anybody know what was going on,
Kept it to yourself. You
and
stayed
you
quiet.
you kept
You
whatever you
sucked it
had
in.
to
Yeah.
yourself. You didn't let anything out, and you didn't let anybody in.
In. Yeah.
That building insulation, they call it that wall of insulation, and a lot of, well, men, I would say more men than women, are embarrassed to ask somebody for help, are embarrassed because of their culture. "Well, I ain't telling you what's going on with me. I'm not gonna tell you. I'm not gonna reveal my darkest
Out of shame,
secrets.
yeah.
Yeah, out of shame. I'll give you, for instance, and maybe, I don't know if we'll try to move on, but I'll give you, for instance, I had one of the top psychologists in the country in my corner. His name was Dr. Harry Labert. He was the director of Creedmoor, and he was like my Yoda. He was my Yoda, and I wouldn't give him all my dark secrets. He knew
Even
I
him,
drank. He
yeah.
knew I drank. I was kind of remanded to go for therapy, and I'll leave that part of the story out of it.
Sure, sure.
That'll be another chapter.
That's another cha
I was pivotal point of being remanded
right.
or going on your own or being court ordered. There's several facets to that. So it's cunning, baffling, and insidious, the disease of addiction. There's the other slogans. So I was looking up to him to the point where he was in my Yoda, and if you close he was 93, but if you close your eyes, it was like talking to somebody 30 years old with wisdom and knowledge and kindness and nurturing. And hearing him, and I say, "Oh, shit, I'm not gonna tell this guy,"
And this is the director of the Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, who's,
Yes,
which is,
he is famous,
yes, yeah.
and he was retired. And another good friend of mine said, "Hey, listen, look at, I got this guy. You're gonna go this way, or if you see this man, you're gonna go a little bit over to the better side." And he decided to take me on as a patient,
Mm.
and I was ashamed to tell him what I was doing, mostly.
Do you think he knew on some level, but he allowed you to own that level of inhibition, the denial,
You know what? We're cunning
to hold back?
individuals. We are
Yeah.
cunning individuals.
I often
Okay.
curious about that, how
Yeah, we're addicts and alcoholics are cunning, and that's why my counselor, the director, he was right to the point. He's seen it and heard it all. So, he, I told him, I was involved in some things, but he was so kind and nurturing to me. Then I was embarrassed.
yeah.
I was like,
So most men are, and
yeah,
that's that wall of denial,
right,
because the withholding in the culture, and for many years, from many years ago,
right.
any baby boomer, Gen X person really has a hard time, recognizing the importance of treatment. Even if something is broken, they don't want to fix it. They want to fix it on their own. So that's the typical manly man, and you really had a hard time, with that. Yet you still overcame a lot of obstacles and took it to the next level, and reached numerous pivot points to be able to be where you are, and the success that you've had, which is really impressive. For the sake of time, I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation in another interview, and we can get to the other types of pivot points that you've had that I've heard about.
You get a
And
ring the overtime bell over here.
well, that's wonderful. But I like to say the work doesn't end here. It just continues. It'll continue with you. And when I work with people, I remind them that the work that we're doing now, this is a workout. The therapy occurs between the times we visit one another, and this is a workout. So,
Very true.
I want to thank you for your time. It has been wonderful to have the opportunity to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to our other opportunities to speak once again.
Thank you for allowing me into the space, and
Yes.
and I wish you a very good night, and I will see you soon.
Yes, we'll speak again.
Good
Enjoy.
night.
Bye-bye.